What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 47 of the Boochcast reviews Darkside of the Ring. And I'm excited this week, ladies and gentlemen, because we've got an awesome episode for you guys. And as you can see, I'm riding solo because once again, the team did not want to be involved in this episode, and I have no idea why, because this is actually a really, really good episode involving somebody whose name I'd heard before, but didn't really know a whole lot about. And I knew it sounded familiar, and then once I saw the episode and I saw why this was familiar to me, that's when I realized, oh shit, I do remember this guy somewhat. And it also, and I'll explain a little later, is why I'm wearing a leather jacket on this episode. And so don't worry, I am going to explain why this jacket's here. But I have to address right now that I'm wearing one, otherwise you're not going to listen to a word I say. But I'll explain why the jacket's here as we go along. But this week, we're getting into one of the biggest names in wrestling, Chris Adams, the gentleman and the demon. That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, split personality, bipolar fucking episode to get into, and there's nothing else left to do now except to get it started. A judo champion who came to America with the dream of becoming a star of the squared circle, Chris Adams captured lightning in a bottle. With his athleticism, determination, and charm, Chris had all the tools to become a megastar. He was an A-list celebrity in world-class championship wrestling and was known as the guy who trained Stone Cold Steve Austin. That's right. That is Chris Adams' biggest claim to fame. He's the guy who trained Austin on how to be a wrestler. When Stone Cold decided to break into the business back when he was just regular old Steve Williams with the long blonde hair, Chris Adams was the guy who taught Steve everything he knows. So bear that in mind before you judge this guy. Without Chris Adams, there is no Stone Cold Steve Austin. More on that later on. But behind the curtain, Chris's most challenging opponent was himself. He had a Jekyll and Hyde personality that was caused by alcohol. So apparently he had a nice, outgoing personality, very likable. Then he drank some alcohol and became kind of a dick. Gee, I wonder where I've seen that before. No wonder Zach didn't want to be part of this. One man with two personalities on a downward spiral that can only end one way. He weighed 233 pounds and was called the Gentleman from England. While traveling on the road, he would always write letters to his daughter and send birthday cards. Now, his daughter Jade, who's featured in this episode, they go to her and she reads a letter from her dad. And this is what the letter said. Dear Jade, wow, how time flies. I miss you so much, Munchkin. Yep, you're still my Munchkin, even though you're nearly 14 and a beautiful young woman already. It seems that I have always been struggling trying to make it, and that before you knew it, half of my life is over, and I missed out on so much. I really want to see you more often. Family is so important. I feel so guilty now. I think of all the things I've done in the past that have hurt people, and I often grieve about them every day. Anyway, I thought it was time that I told you my true feelings, and I hope that you'll be able to forgive me. Love, Daddy. Now, right here, right off the bat, you're seeing something in wrestling that you don't normally see. And that is a wrestler who's on the road, away from his family, but genuinely misses his family. Most wrestlers, when they go on the road, they're not really thinking about their families. But obviously, Chris understood, as I mentioned many times here on Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring, this was the cost that you had to pay in order to make it as a wrestler. You're traveling 300 plus days a year. You work the towns. You're out there performing. You're constantly on the road. You're home for a couple days and you're back on the road again. Like, that's the life of a professional wrestler. It's also the life of a musician. It's the life of a comedian. You travel a lot for work. And when you have a job that requires you to travel, you're gonna be away from your family. And it's gonna take a toll. So all you ladies out there that dream about marrying a rock star or marrying a comedian or marrying a pro wrestler, if you're going to date somebody with that kind of lifestyle, you have to understand they're going to be away from home. That's the one thing they can't control. Now, what they can control is the drugs and the drinking. They can stay away from that. And obviously there's other skeletons in a wrestler's closet that some wrestlers, like Earthquake, for example, are able to avoid. But even Earthquake couldn't avoid the time and days on the road. Even he had to deal with that grind despite not having any demons. But here, at least we know that Chris, despite whatever issues he has, despite what type of person he is, he genuinely loved his kids and his family. And he even wishes there were times where he felt like he could have been a better father. He wishes he could be around more. He wishes he didn't have to miss out on so many things. So he at least admits that he can't be there. But he always writes letters and sends birthday cards. He at least acknowledges the fact that he has a daughter. Hey, I'm writing you letters, let you know how much I miss you. Here's a birthday card, happy birthday, I'm sure there's some money in it. Like, obviously, Chris is acknowledging, and that's the best you can do when you have a job like that. As long as you're at least acknowledging, hey, happy birthday, I love you, son, I love you, daughter, I love you, honey, all that stuff. As long as you're putting forth that effort, then you're doing your part as you're traveling on the road. But again, you gotta have someone who can be supportive of that. If that's gonna be a struggle for you, don't get involved with a wrestler. Don't get involved with a musician. Don't get involved with a comedian. Don't date or marry someone who travels all the time for work if that's going to be an issue for you. Because if you know how this person lives before you date them and then start to judge them, that's unfair and it's selfish. Because you knew what job in life they had before you entered in. You have no right to tell that person to give up their lifestyle just to be with you. Worst thing you can do is give up your career for a woman or a man. You know why? Because your career will never wake up one day and decide it doesn't love you anymore. Jade said he was a gentle, loving person, and since he's not here to defend himself, she wants to do it for him. So basically, Jade wants to be here on this show to defend his dad and talk about the positives. Because we know there's going to be a lot of people on this show that are prepared to talk about the negatives. Especially the ones who didn't care for Chris Adams. But Jade at least wants to be here and talk about, look, here's what type of father he was. This is the Chris Adams that I know, as opposed to the Chris Adams that the rest of the people know. Which I like, because it gives a different perspective. Okay, there were some good moments, there were some bad moments. That's everybody in life. Long before anyone could imagine that his story would end in tragedy, Chris Adams was a spectacular performer who seemed destined for greatness. Chris was considered one of the toughest men in the business and also was a great in-ring worker. His finisher was the super kick, and he kicked like a horse. When he hit the move, he would slap his leg to make it sound more devastating. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this is the part of the show where all of the AEW marks and the Young Buck fans are going to jump up and down, or the indie marks are going to jump out of their seats and go, see, he slaps his leg, he slapped his leg. Why does everybody else get shit for slapping their legs? He clearly slapped his leg. All right. Calm down, 40-year-old virgins. Calm the fuck down. Cool out. Let me explain why Chris is the exception. Because when he slapped his leg, you didn't see him do it. That's the difference. With the Buck and a lot of the indie marks that overuse the super kick and prostitute this move to death, when they slap their legs or slap their thigh, you can clearly see them doing it. It's like a magician that makes something disappear using sleight of hand. If he's able to move his hand in a way to where you don't notice the change, that's good. That's magic. But if you can clearly see the object sliding into his sleeve or going somewhere, then the trick is stupid. That's a shitty magician. Yeah, you're doing the sleight of hand, but I can see it. There's no sleight of hand. You basically did sleight of hand and rolled a nat 1. And I clearly fucking see what you just did. That's the difference. When Chris slapped, and I know, because I rewind, when they would show his super kick, I rewind the tape over and over again to see if I could pinpoint the moment where Chris slapped his leg. And I never could. Couldn't see it. And also, Chris Adams originated the super kick. So he was the inventor of the super kick. So long before Shawn Michaels was tuning up the band for Sweet Chin Music, before the Young Bucks took this move and prostituted it to death, and then the Usos would come along and do the same, especially recently at WrestleMania, Chris Adams was the original. And obviously I had to include the Usos in there because I don't need any of the marks thinking I'm biased. Yes, I am aware that the Usos have abused the super kick as well. When they first started doing it, they weren't abusing it as much. But clearly, over the last year or so, they have, and they abused it in the worst way during their one-on-one match at WrestleMania 40. So yes, I am aware that both the Young Bucks and the Usos abuse the super kick. Almost everybody today abuses the super kick. But when Chris Adams did it, it was new, it was innovative, and it was devastating. When he hit you with a super kick, you did not get up. That was his finish, and you did not fuck up his finish. So Chris Adams is to blame for the super kick, but he's not to blame for the fact that it's been used and abused by every fucking wrestler that exists today. You'd be hard-pressed to find a wrestler today who doesn't do a fucking super kick. And a lot of the time, it doesn't put the person down. Which is why I've always said, if you gotta hit somebody with a super kick multiple times in a match, is it really super? I'll answer that question for you. It's not. At all. Chris hit a super kick, it's one. One kick ended it all. Now, Chris grew up taking judo alongside his brother, who is a two-time Olympic silver medalist. Chris was good, but knew he wasn't good enough to go to the Olympics or win tournaments, so he decided to venture into pro wrestling after being approached by World of Sport Wrestling. Now, apparently, World of Sport Wrestling is a professional wrestling group or club that brought Chris Adams in to teach him the business. Now, he debuted as Black Belt Chris Adams. That was his first in-ring name because he had a black belt in judo. So he was an expert in judo, and that's where he got the idea for the super kick, was from his years as a judo martial artist. He had movie star good looks, but he also was a showman who could charm anybody. And that was the secret to Chris's success. He had charisma. He had showmanship, which is a key thing in wrestling. Because those are the things you can't teach. Everything else in wrestling can be taught. The moves can be taught. If I went to a wrestling school and I applied myself, I could learn how to do a lot of the wrestling moves that some guys can do. But all the other stuff, the charisma, the showmanship, you either have it or you don't. And if you have those things, they're willing to work with you. Because it's like I said, we can teach him all the wrestling shit, but he's already got the look, the showmanship, the charm. Combine that with the wrestling moves, you have a fucking star. Eager to glamorize and elevate his TV image, Chris recruits Jeannie to join his act. Now, Jeannie is a woman he met at a bar where he introduced himself and wrote his number on her hand. She loved his dimples and said he looked like Paul McCartney. Within a month, they moved in together. So things move fast. Like, that's how much of a ladies' man Chris was. And Jeannie, of course, is a valet that we know as Lady Blossom. He invites her to be his valet, but she behaved more like a corner person in a boxing match, giving him a towel and water to drink. Now, Jeannie claims she's the first to ever do this. Now, I don't think she's the first valet in wrestling, but she might be the first one to act like a corner person. Like, basically, to put this in modern terms, what she did was what you see corner people do in the Heritage Cup matches in NXT. Which ironically is like British rules, which ironically is where Chris is from, England. So it kind of makes sense. But you see that in NXT when they do the Heritage Cup matches. Though his fame in England is growing, Chris knows it has a ceiling. So instead of staying frustrated, he and Jeannie packed their bags for the City of Angels. Within 2 or 3 months of moving out there, Jeannie is pregnant. As Chris and Jeannie settle into their new life, a pregnant Jeannie is often left alone in Redondo Beach. Eventually, Chris goes to Mexico to wrestle and make money, while Jeannie goes back to the UK to give birth to Jade. So Jade, the girl that we talked about earlier, she's the daughter of Chris and Jeannie. Now, eventually, Chris rejoined her in the UK to see his daughter and spend a little time with her, but then told her they had to go back to California because that's where Chris was out there making his money. Chris was out there being successful. That's where he could get the most work as a wrestler and evolve his career. So he stayed in the UK with her for a while to get him all situated, but eventually, like, look, we have to go back to California because I gotta go make a damn living. With the family back together, Chris is eager to return to the US, but for Jeannie, the thrill is gone. Chris stopped coming home. The final straw was when Chris had to leave for New Year's and said she couldn't come with him, but told her to cook and get some champagne and they would have a meal together when he came back. She did, but Chris came home 3 days later and she dumped him. They stayed friends and co-parents, but that was as far as it went. She felt he was cheating on him. Her first red flags were when they were sunbathing and he stared at hot girls in bikinis who came walking by. Okay, I'm just gonna say this right now. Whether or not Chris was actually cheating on Jeannie, I don't know. Again, Chris is not here to confess or tell that side of the story. Now, he's a professional wrestler, so there's a very strong chance he might have been cheating on her because infidelity is very rampant in the wrestling business. I think Earthquake is one of only a handful of wrestlers. I think like Earthquake, maybe Jesse Ventura, and that might be it. I don't know any others. I'm sure there's others, but I can't think of them off the top of my head right now, but they're two of the few that have never cheated while on the road. They stayed faithful to their wives forever and ever. I mean, granted, Jesse's still alive, but obviously he's not going to cheat on his wife anytime soon. I mean, hell, he was a wrestler, he was a politician, he was an actor. If he was going to cheat on his wife, it would have happened a long time ago. But anyway, there's a chance he might have been cheating. But I will say this. If you're a woman who gets insecure because a guy sees a hot girl in a bikini that's walking by, you need serious fucking help. Here are the facts, okay? If a hot girl walks by, a guy is gonna look. Just like how if an attractive guy walks by, a girl's gonna look. There's nothing wrong with looking. It's like the rule. You can look, but don't touch. You know, and as long as he's not being a perverted dick about it, that's fine. Okay, a hot girl walks by. He looks and he looks back. Now, obviously, she's gonna be insecure because she's pregnant and heavy set, and women who look like that get insecure. It's like, look, I'm gonna let women in on another little secret about guys. If you're fat because you're pregnant, no guy is gonna judge you for that. Because we understand the reason you're fat is because you're pregnant. There is a difference between having a giant belly because you're carrying a baby and having a giant belly because you're eating a lot of junk food. But yeah, no matter how attractive you are, another attractive woman walks by, some guys are going to be like, damn, she hot. But almost every guy is not going to do anything about it. We put her in the spank bank and we move on. That's what we do. A guy sees a hot girl, he's going to look, okay? The problem is, in most relationships, women live under the delusion that once you enter into a relationship with a guy, that you're the only woman he's allowed to think is hot. And it's an unrealistic expectation to have. You know, or if you're a guy, you think that if you're in a relationship with a woman, you're the only attractive man in the world. You're not, you know? If I had a girlfriend and she finds Leonardo DiCaprio attractive, I don't give a shit. You know, if there's a guy with six-pack abs walking across the beach and she looks, I don't give a shit. As long as she's not fucking him, we're good. You know? Just don't cheat on me. That's my rule. I don't care if you find another dude attractive. Just don't cheat on me and keep it to yourself. You know, that's what I do. I've been in relationships. I've seen hot girls walk by. I've looked. I'll be honest, I've stared at hot women. But I've never in my entire life cheated on my girlfriend. Any girlfriend I've had, I've always been faithful. Because that's the requirement. You don't cheat. That's pretty much it. You're allowed to look. You just can't touch. That's the rule. So no, it's not a red flag if he stares at a hot girl in a bikini. That's not a red flag. A red flag is if he sees a hot girl in a bikini and walks over to talk to her. That's a red flag, okay? Just look and then go right back to doing what you're doing. They eventually moved to Dallas, Texas, where he joins World Class Championship Wrestling. Jade says even though her parents were separated, she still saw him every weekend. Because World Class did shows during the week and everything. And they were off for a couple days and they get back on the road and they did their shows. But he's still making an effort to be a parent, which again is a positive side to Chris Adams. He wants to be a wrestler. He wants to pursue this dream. He wants to be a star. But he's also remembering he is a father. And he's being a father. So he might not have been a great boyfriend. He might not have been a great husband. But at least he's a good father. The kids have nothing negative to say about him. Based out of Dallas, Texas, World Class Championship Wrestling was one of the hottest and most popular wrestling companies in the world. They had Iceman, King Parsons, the Von Erichs, and the Freebirds. Chris was an incredible athlete with an incredible personality, which allowed him to stand out. He did kip-ups, dives, and of course, the super kick. So he was able to do all of those successfully. Only when he did dives, he did them when they mattered, and he did them with people who knew how to properly sell a dive. Which, if y'all don't know how to do that, I'm going to illustrate. Guys on the floor outside the ring. Here's the guy who wants to do the dive. Here's what you do. You watch they slowly get up. As he's slowly getting up, then you run, bounce off the ropes, come running in. Guy slowly gets up. You're running towards him. By the time he gets to here, you dive. He turns. Oh, shit. Boom. That's what you do. You don't run and bounce off the rope until he starts to get up, and then you make sure by the time you come over for the dive, he's up, turns, bam. That's how you do it. That's the simple way to do a fucking dive. It is literally that fucking simple. Most pro wrestlers were ex-bullies from high school, and Chris definitely fell in that category. Once while driving to a show with Kevin Von Erich, their driver got lost on the way to the building. In World Class, they had a strict rule that the talent had to be there an hour before the show, or there were problems. So you had to be at the building an hour before showtime. And that was a rule for the talent. Obviously, the people who had to set up the ring and do all the other shit, the heavy lifting, they had to be there earlier than that. But the talent, the wrestlers, had to be there an hour before the show. Chris was late to the show and blamed it on the driver. When Chris got angry, his eyes would shine bright red, and he choked the driver and damn near killed him. Kevin said, "Chris, you almost killed him." Chris said, "Well, Kev, some people are hard learners. I don't want him to do it again." He wasn't even drunk. So this is Chris sober. I can only imagine what happens when he gets drunk. But sober, he damn near choked this guy for making them late to the show. And Chris is like, "You almost killed him." He's like, "Well, some people are hard learners. I didn't want to do it again." And I thought it was kind of funny. I bet that was CM Punk's mentality when he choked out Jack Perry. Sometimes people do need pain in order to learn shit. It's like parents who discipline their kids. You can talk and talk and talk all you want, but at some point, to get the kid to listen to you, you're just going to have to smack them up a little bit. Hey, I'm in charge here. Because pain will give you a memory of what not to do. Now, do I think the driver deserved to be choked? Not really. I don't think this warranted a choking. Unless Chris yelled at the driver got smart with them, and then he choked him. Okay, I get it. But we're getting a glimpse into how crazy Chris can really be. Now established in World Class, Chris's ambition is to be the star of the show. But in a company crowded with good guys, the path to stardom is to become a villain. The Von Erichs were the baby faces, and always in the main event because they were the sons of the promoter, Fritz Von Erich. And they would main event against whatever heel they were facing. And this right here is another story you hear amongst wrestlers who turn heel or turn face. Is because if you're crowded with good guys, you're not going to wrestle another good guy. Because back then, they actually paired up heels with villains. Like when Bret Hart turned heel against Steve Austin. Bret Hart realized as a babyface, there wasn't a lot for him to work with. He pretty much just had Vader. But if Bret turned heel, he could work with Austin, he could work with Shawn Michaels, he could work with Undertaker, he could work with all these other people. So Bret said, okay, let's turn me heel. Or Edge, he realized he needed to turn heel. So he could work with these other strong baby faces. And Triple H was the same way. During the Attitude Era, when Triple H was with D-Generation X, remember, DX were baby faces when they feuded against the Corporation or they feuded against the Nation of Domination. Triple H was a babyface. Austin was a babyface, and The Rock was a heel. So Austin and Rock were feuding. Eventually, The Rock got kicked out of the Corporation and became a babyface. And him and Austin would fight against the corporate ministry. So because of that, Triple H, who could have easily rode the DX thing for a long time, he went to Vince and said, "I want to leave DX and I want to turn heel." Because Triple H realized he wanted to be a main eventer. He wanted to be a world champion. He didn't want to be mid-card for life, like Shawn Michaels had branded him as. Because they said, he only hangs out with world champions. He's never been one. He hangs out with main eventers, but he's never been in the main event. Also referring, of course, to his time in the Clique. Triple H had never been a world champion, and he wanted to get to that level, but knew he couldn't get there. But also he knew as a babyface, as good as he was never going to be bigger than Austin and The Rock. He wasn't. Austin and Rock were on a level Triple H could never reach. Even to this day, he couldn't reach that level. It's still designed that way. Because Triple H was never the guy who drew the money. He was the guy who worked with the guy that drew the money. You serve two purposes in wrestling. You're the guy who sells the tickets or the guy who helps sells the tickets. And Triple H was a guy who helped to sell the tickets. He was a top guy, but he was never the top guy. He was never going to be the name and face of the WWE. I mean, he is today, but as a chief content officer. As a creative member, he's on top of the WWE. But as an in-ring competitor, he was never at that level. So he knew the only way he was going to go to the main event was to turn heel. So that way, Austin and Rock have a strong heel in Triple H that each one of them can feud with. It's like Hogan needed Roddy Piper. Superman needs Lex Luthor. Batman needs the Joker. Every good hero needs a good villain to feud with in order to tell a story. So that's why Chris is turning heel, because he can be the bad guy to feud with all these good guys and draw money. They team up Chris with Gino Hernandez. There's a blast from the past. Good old gorgeous Gino. Which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if y'all don't know, that's why I'm wearing this leather jacket. Because a long time ago, I believe it was March 18th, 2021 to be exact, was when I put out the video of me reviewing the episode of Gino Hernandez from the first season of Darkside of the Ring. And at that time, I was wearing a black leather jacket. Well, that leather jacket has been beaten to death, so I got this new jacket. So I figured, since these two are a tag team, and I wore my old leather jacket in the first video, I'm going to wear my new leather jacket for this video. So that's why for this one video, I got a leather jacket on, to represent the tag team. So now you have the answer to why this jacket's on. They came up with the plan to become the heel team by having Chris Adams team with Kevin Von Erich against Jake the Snake Roberts and Gino Hernandez. In the match, Chris turns on Kevin by nailing him with a super kick, and he teams with Gino to form the Dynamic Duo. That was their tag team name, the Dynamic Duo. Jake stayed with them for a while, but eventually left the group. So for a period of time, they were a three-man team, but eventually Jake moved on to other things. They were bad to the bone. They would strut to the ring, both were great on the mic, and knew how to get heat, which is rare. Usually in a tag team, you have one guy that can cut the promos and one guy who can't. In this team, both men could cut promos. Like, this is one of the rare moments where you have a tag team where there isn't a Marty Jannetty in this group. Like I've always said, there's some tag teams where some guy becomes the Shawn Michaels, the other guy becomes the Marty Jannetty. Both these men could have been Shawn Michaels. Both these men. Sadly, they both ended up becoming Marty Jannetty, but more on that later. The territory was sold out with 3,000 people almost every night. Chris was making tons of money and had a red convertible and a condo on Lover's Lane. Teaming with Gino Hernandez has elevated Chris Adams to the main event scene and world class. But along with the money and the fame, Stardom introduces Chris to a new world of dangers and temptations. They would go to the Best Western in San Antonio on the 3rd floor. Chris and Gino would have 3 rooms with 2 tables in each room. One room had bricks of cocaine and weed, and the other had pills. And then they had a pyramid of Jack Daniels for the Freebirds and Iceman champagne. So this is where they go to party after the shows, do all the drugs and the booze and the broads. They had a cop on each door and was paying them $1,000 a piece to watch the door and also not snitch or arrest anyone getting high. So they paid off cops. So they're off-duty cops. They're doing security, and each of them got $1,000. Hey, here's $1,000. Just watch the door and don't repeat what you say here. And $1,000 for a cop for a night's work, that's a lot of fucking money. See, part of the reason that cops, not all cops, let me just specify that, not all cops. I'm only talking about some, not all. Some cops are easily corrupted is because they don't make a lot of money. So it's easy to bribe people. If you make a ton of money, you can't be bought. But if you're broke and you have a family to support, you can be bought. They also had so many women at the party that you would get more pussy on accident than you would on purpose. So yeah, like I said, there was a lot of women and there's a lot of fucking going on. Now, on February 2nd, 1986, Gino Hernandez dies of what was ruled as a cocaine overdose. Now, if you want to learn more about Gino's death, go to that episode of Darkside of the Ring if you haven't already. We have a Boochcast Reviews episode that I do where I talk about the mysterious death of Gorgeous Gino. In fact, at the end of this video, I'll have a link to that video. Click on that and go back and watch that if you haven't already. Now, if you're one of those people that's been following all of our episodes, or you watch from the playlist on down, then you've already seen Gorgeous Gino. But you just happen to stumble upon this video and you haven't watched the other ones, you can go back and watch the Gino Hernandez episode to learn more about his death, his life, and his career. In the wake of Gino's death, Chris's use of drugs and alcohol begins to worry those closest to him. Alcohol brought out the demon inside of Chris, which is why it's called the gentleman and the demon. It would cause him to get mean and vicious. Once in Israel, he got in a fight with a bartender and super kicked him in the side of the head and knocked his eyeball out of the socket. Like his eye literally came out. And they had to call people to go to Israel and get Chris because it looked like he was about to go to jail in Israel. But yeah, he literally knocked somebody's eye out of the socket. That's how devastating that super kick can be if done by the right person. Like they said, he kicks like a horse. And everybody knows getting kicked in the face by a horse can fucking kill you. That's why they always tell you, never stand behind a horse. Always stand to the side or the front, but never directly behind a horse. Because that sumbitch will kick and you got a whole new set of problems on your hands. But Chris's drinking and bar fighting doesn't detract from his appeal as he strikes up a new relationship with a woman named Toni Collins. He met her at a bar, shocker, in Fort Worth that the wrestlers would go to after the show. They got free drinks in exchange for the publicity. So basically this bar would ask World Class Wrestling, hey, plug our bar, promote our show at your show, and in exchange, we'll give you all free drinks when you come here. So it's like, fuck yeah. So it's like the wrestlers got to drink for free. Everybody else had to pay. But the wrestlers, the talent, they got to drink for free. And all they had to do was plug the bar and tell people, hey, here's where we're going after the show. And everybody would come to the show to hang with the wrestlers. And, you know, the wrestlers drank for free, but everybody else had to pay. And sometimes when you're in a business, you do deals like that to get more clientele. Like, all right, we'll sacrifice the free booze to the talent when we get all these fans to pay. Because you'll make more money from the fans paying. They got married and had a son named Chris. So Chris Jr. This is Chris Adams Jr. Jade said she was a wonderful mom to her. So obviously, Jade got along with Toni. Even though Jeannie is technically her mother, Jade still got along with Toni. And she was like a second mom to her, and they had a great relationship. She was fierce and strong-willed, but also loving and caring. Chris Sr. said she was a 6'4", 400-pound man trapped in the body of a 5'2", 100-pound woman. Now, obviously, back then, Chris was being funny, but of course, in today's psycho-liberal snowflake world, you can bet somebody out there is going, ha ha, your wife identifies as a dude. Ha ha, Chris Sr.'s dating a tranny. I bet there's some asshole out there saying that. You can see that headline coming out from the liberal media. Chris loved her dearly, but any hope that marriage might soften Chris's temper is quickly lost. They were flying back from a show in Puerto Rico, and there was an equipment malfunction with the plane that caused a huge delay. It was sweaty and hot on the plane because they had no air conditioning, so they start serving drinks. Chris drinks all the way until takeoff. They cut him off after 2 more drinks and he gets pissed. Chris gets up to get more alcohol and the stewardess blocks him and he says, "Get out of the way, bitch." She slaps him and Chris slaps her back. Airplane pilot comes out and shakes him and says, "What's your problem?" Chris's eyes turn red and he grabbed the pilot by the lapels of his coat and his feet weren't even touching the ground. Chris said, "Feel the power," and headbutted him in the face. Some would see this as a wake-up call. Chris didn't. Now, this is the part of the show where I'm going to get some heat, if I haven't gotten any already. Now, obviously, Chris shouldn't have said, "Get out of the way, bitch." But I'm going to say this. Up until this point, Chris hadn't done anything really threatening. He just called her a bitch and said, "Get out of my way." But the moment that stewardess slapped him in the face, you basically gave Chris Adams consent to slap her back. Because I said it before and I'll say it again. I do not condone beating women, okay? I don't think a man should be allowed to beat up a woman for no reason. And I think any man who does is a piece of shit. But if you slap somebody first, you have every right to slap them back. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, because you're a woman, you can just beat up on a guy all you want and the guy can't do anything about it because you're a lady. Fuck that. Fuck that. If you're strong enough to throw a punch, you're strong enough to take a punch. If you're strong enough to throw a slap, you're strong enough to take one. I am a firm believer. You hit me first, I am well within my rights to hit you back. I don't care about your race. I don't care about your gender. I don't care about your sexual orientation. I don't even care about your age. You put your hands on me, there's a fight. So if you don't want me to hit you, don't hit me. Now, if the stewardess had told him to take a seat, sit down, got authoritative, and Chris just straight up slapped her for no reason, I would 100% side with the stewardess and call Chris Adams a piece of shit. But because she slapped him first, I have no sympathy for the stewardess. None. She got what she deserved. I don't care if he called you a bitch. That's not grounds to slap somebody at all. So Chris was justified in my opinion. Now, obviously he had no right to headbutt the pilot in the face, but the fact that the dude grabbed him and shook him, yeah, that's gonna provoke somebody. I don't know why this guy thought he could grab and shake somebody. And this is another mistake that people make. Why do people think you can fuck with wrestlers and not get your ass kicked? You gotta get that whole wrestling is fake mentality out of your head. If you pick a fight with a wrestler, they're gonna beat the shit out of you. Stop thinking just because wrestling is scripted that these guys aren't badasses who could fuck you up. They are, they can, and they will. As soon as y'all get that through your heads, the better off the world's gonna be. For the sake of your well-being, don't fuck with wrestlers. Arrested for headbutting a pilot on a flight back from Puerto Rico, Chris Adams has put the future of his career in jeopardy. It wasn't until he sobered up that he realized how much trouble he was in. It gave World Class some bad publicity, and he got sentenced to 3 months in prison. It brought shame to the company, despite him being a heel, which I thought was fucking weird. A heel's going to prison, it brings shame to the company? Alright. Fritz said he needed to straighten up or he was fired. So basically, Fritz Von Erich is now telling Chris, get your anger under control, get your alcohol under control, because if you keep fucking up like this, we're going to let you go. And this is another situation where this should be a wake-up call if you're a wrestler. Because if you lose your job, where are you going to go? Because obviously as a wrestler, you can work indie shows and get booked in other places, but if you start to develop a bad reputation with promoters and bookers, eventually you can get blackballed and nobody will want to work with you. And with his dangerous reputation now hindering his career, Chris begins looking for new ways to capitalize on his fame. He starts holding professional wrestling coaching classes. He makes an instructional video called The ABC of Professional Wrestling. He held the school at the Sportatorium during the day when World Class wasn't running shows. So World Class would run the shows at night. So during the day when the Sportatorium's open, Chris Adams said, well, I'm going to run a wrestling school. And the courses lasted anywhere from 9 months to 2 years, depending on the student. So what Chris would do is he would cater the course to a specific student. Because some students may need more time than others. Some people might need a couple months of training and they're good to go. Then you got some people who may need to train for a couple years before they have their first match. It depends on how much you're willing to learn and how well you pick up the pace. Like before when we talked about Buff Bagwell, he had everything down in almost 3 months. Some people have it down 6 months, some people 9 months, some people a year, some people 2 years. Sometimes you gotta learn, and depending on how long it takes will determine how long your course lasts. Now obviously, the people who pick it up more naturally will move up the ladder quicker. The people who need a little more time will eventually get there, but they may need longer to develop. For example, Randy Orton, he took to wrestling naturally, was able to move up a little quicker. John Cena, he had the charisma and everything else down, he had the fundamentals, he just needed to get better timing in the ring and work on his psychology. And over time, he got better and better and better until he became one of the best wrestlers in the world. And of course, Steve Austin was one of the first students, as I mentioned before. So Steve Austin is one of the first students that Chris Adams has. Now, Chris taught Steve the basics and fundamental principles of combat. He was a guy off the street who came into the USWA Wrestling Academy. So Chris is teaching Steve everything that he needs to know about the business. He's learning combat, but then he's also learning wrestling and working. Now, while training the future Steve Austin, Chris introduced his new friend to an old flame. Jeannie was brought in as Lady Blossom to be his manager, and eventually they started dating. And as a side note, they later got married. And believe it or not, she's actually Steve Austin's second wife, and they were married from 1992 to 1999. And as a little side note, when Steve Austin was looking for a name change from the Ringmaster, you know, he's sitting there going through all this stuff like Iceman, Ice Train, like he was coming up with different like Ice Pick, like something like that, because he was inspired by this serial killer whose name I can't remember. And his wife's sitting there going, don't worry, it's okay, we'll figure out the name and everything. And she poured in some tea, because she's British. And she goes, now drink your tea before it gets stone cold. And she goes, that's your name, Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that's how he came up with the name. With his ex-girlfriend now dating his top student, Chris cooks up an angle designed to put him back in the main event. Chris was in full control of the angle, and Steve had only been in the business for a few months, so he followed his lead. Which I know sounds weird for a lot of younger people to hear. Steve Austin had to follow somebody's lead? Yeah, because he's not Stone Cold yet. He's not a star yet. He's still new. He's still a greenhorn, as they say. So Chris is obviously, as the veteran, going to dictate how the match goes. Now, Jeannie was also given direction from Chris and wanted her gimmick to be like Joan Collins on Dynasty. So a lot of the promos that Jeannie would cut on Tony, they were stuff that Chris had written for Jeannie to say. Because they have Tony as Chris's valet and Jeannie as Austin's valet to build this story and build these great matches. Now, Jeannie and Tori would have cat fights, hair pulling, slapping, eye scratching, and kendo sticks. Neither one of them knew how to wrestle, so they would just fight. And the promos were off the charts. So again, the promos were on point and told the story. So when the actual fights happened, they would work. And what's funny is, I'll tell this other story. After the Gino Hernandez episode, I had an episode on the Fabulous Moolah. And I talked about how back then, when the women wrestled, they incorporated cat fights and hair pulling and slapping and eye scratching, because that's how women fight. So they would incorporate that into the matches to make them more real. And there was actually a YouTube channel called @LittlePixieBot that actually got triggered by me saying that, which I thought was hilarious, by the way. Like, she actually said, "You think hair pulling is how women wrestled? You should research Mildred Burke. She wrestled like a wrestler compared to Moolah's sloppy choreography. While it's true she promoted women, she also held it back and made women's wrestling a joke. If you compare Japanese women's wrestling, they were light years ahead of wrestling in the US. The divas were sexist and degrading because they were treated like eye candy without showing decent wrestling choreography. Sure, them men have gimmicks, but you don't see them being subjected to stripping for female viewers. I had a male friend who loved wrestling and hated the divas for the above reason." That's because he's gay, probably. "I showed him ROH's Shimmer, which has female wrestlers who both looked sexy and demonstrated their talent way more than WWE would allow until recently. He was much happier with the Shimmer girls and said he would propose to all of them. Many guys like seeing women, sexy women. However, more men prefer women who can both look good and kick ass." So this is obviously a feminist bitch doing this. So I wrote back to her and said, "Hey Angela, thanks for the comment. First of all, let me just clarify the hair pulling. I didn't say that's how women wrestled. I said that's how normal women fight. Obviously, I'm not referring to professional women fighters. I'm referring to normal, average, everyday women. So that's why I said that hair pulling and wrestling works, because it is believable, which is a key factor in convincing people that the match they are seeing is real, even if it's not. Obviously, they are expected to do other wrestling moves as well, but hair pulling and scratching are stuff that real women do in fights, so incorporating that into the match gives it reality if done right. Also, in Moolah's era, women's wrestling was the farthest thing from a joke, and I respectfully disagree with you on the fact that the divas were treated like eye candy without showing decent wrestling choreography. While there were some women who were merely eye candy, there were several women over the years like Jacqueline, Jazz, Trish Stratus, Lita, Ivory, Chyna, Sensational Sherry, who we're going to talk about next week, Medusa, and Molly Holly, just to name a few, who were divas that were sexy and got it done in the ring. Also, if you think the girls didn't have any guys to strip for them, might I suggest Googling the name Val Venus or Buff Bagwell. They had gimmicks specifically geared towards turning on the women. Hell, even Rick Rude was all about taking off his robe and showing women what a real man is supposed to look like. Finally, I do agree with you 100% that men like women who can both look good and kick ass in wrestling. And if women can do both, I salute and respect her and wish her all the best in her career. But at the same time, if a woman is just eye candy, then there will always be a spot for her on the roster, even if it's just a valet. Because men love attractive women unless they're gay. Nothing wrong with that, just stating a fact. Anyway, I appreciate you for taking the time to watch the video, and I hope you will subscribe and check out the rest of our content. Also, feel free to check out the links in the pinned comment to listen to the podcast. Have a wonderful day. So, Little Pixie Bot, if you happen to be watching this particular episode, turns out Booch was right again. You're welcome. There were some real-life drama, as Austin felt like he was being held back a little bit as Chris saw him becoming a top star. Austin and Jeannie eventually go to WCW, increasing Chris's jealousy. So obviously, Chris was reaching the point where he felt like Austin was getting bigger than him, which he didn't like. And he felt like, I'm Chris Adams, I should be getting all these opportunities, and without me, there would be no Austin. So he did get a little bitter and jealous, which does happen. There are some people who, when they take you under their wing, they want you to stay below them. They don't want you to grow. They don't want you to be successful. They want you to stay right underneath them. Because if you get bigger than them, people will say you're better than them, and it will bruise their ego. As Steve and Ginny make the jump to the big time with WCW, a frustrated Chris Adams turns back to the bottle to nurse his bruised ego. So now he's back to drinking. One time Chris was with his wife and son, and he and Tony got into an argument, and she stopped on the interstate, and they almost got killed by a semi. Chris snapped and beat up Tony. She had to have facial surgery. Now he's in the wrong. I know before when Chris slapped the stewardess, I defended Chris. I'm not defending Chris on this one. Because yes, while I will admit she's a fucking idiot for stopping on the intersection and almost getting everyone killed, that did not warrant her getting the crap beat out of her. At best, you just yell at her and call her a stupid bitch. That's all you had to do. Just call her stupid, call her insane, and that's it. Because she's definitely stupid and nuts for stopping on the interstate. I'm sorry, you're a fucking idiot. But you don't deserve to get beat up to the level that Chris beat her up. So now Chris is in the wrong. Now Chris is being a scumbag. Now Chris is a piece of shit. Okay? This is not justified. I'm not defending this. The horrific attack on Tony is a shocking new low for Chris Adams. But as the gentleman continues to struggle, his descent to the bottom will only get worse. Tony had the wonderful lifestyle but felt empty inside. She leaves Chris and takes her son with him. So now he's divorced. Chris's bad reputation follows into his next company, the struggling Global Wrestling Federation. He feuded with Rod the Bod over the world title. Rod's hair was thinning out, so he had a weave sewn in and told the locker room not to pull his hair. Now that was universal in the locker room. Don't touch the hair. During one of the matches, Chris decides to pull the hair. He thought it was a toupee and it would come right off, but instead it got ripped out and blood flowed out of his head like a volcano. He left the ring, got taken to the hospital where he needed 200 stitches. Yeah, so now there's blood flowing out of his head because Chris decided to be funny and pull the fucking hair. Which, here's another moment where I'm going to say, fuck Chris Adams. Fuck him. He deserves to get fired for this. And the reason I say that is because Chris broke a cardinal rule in wrestling. And that is, respect the wishes of your opponent. If your opponent says, I have a weave sewn in, don't pull my hair. Or, I got a bad shoulder, watch my shoulder. I got a bad knee, watch my knee. Or, I got some bruised ribs, so take it easy here. When a wrestler says that to you, you work around the limitations that they give you. That's called respect. That's another way of protecting your opponent. If your opponent says, don't touch the hair, you don't touch the hair. Find another way to get your heat. Find another way to inflict the pain. So Chris Adams, he's a piece of shit for doing that. Real piece of shit. In 1997, Chris finally gets the call from WCW. At the time, the most popular wrestling company in America. He thought it would restart his career, but instead he became a jobber. He got squashed by the Giant, who was smoking a cigarette while he pinned him. He was also jobbing to Rick Steiner, Brad Armstrong, Macho Man Randy Savage on the first episode of Thunder, and Scott Steiner. He eventually got fired for getting a DUI. So this is a moment now where Chris Adams is really getting upset because now he's being treated like a jobber when everyone knows Chris Adams is better than that. And I honestly felt like Chris could have been a mid-card guy. Do I think Chris Adams would have been the world champion? No. But he could have been the U.S. champion. Hell, he could have been the television champion. But for some reason, WCW didn't see that. And I would be intrigued on an episode of 83 Weeks if Conrad Thompson would bring that up on a future episode. I think that's something that Eric Bischoff should address. Why did he make Chris Adams a jobber? Because I'd be intrigued to hear the answer. And if it's an answer that makes sense, well, then it's an answer that makes sense. I'm not mad about it. I'm just curious. Because I feel like Chris could have gave more. He was also getting older and out of shape, so he was no longer seen as a go-to guy. He also started doing GHB, which was pure ecstasy. It's a very dangerous drug, but there's only so much you can take without becoming comatose. So now, he's getting involved in this GHB stuff, which I'll be honest, I've never heard of this. But apparently, it can kill you if you take too much. So you got some wiggle room, but not a lot. As the 90s draw to a close, Chris Adams' life is in shambles. Broke, unable to find work, and desperate for somewhere to live, Chris moves in with a friend of Tom Lance, a local wrestling fan known as Boo Ray. Boo Ray paid the bills, even though Chris would make money from occasional shows. Boo Ray didn't want to take his money. They would have cookouts and pool parties. He loved to help Chris, but also felt like he was being used. Okay. I'm just going to say this right now. If you have a guy move in with you, or a girl or anybody move in with you, and you insist on paying all the bills, and even though Chris is making some money, you feel bad about taking his money because you only get booked every so often, so you don't want to take it. If you make that decision, you can't turn around and say, I'm being used, because you've set the parameters. That's why they tell you in life, it's important to set boundaries. If you don't set boundaries, people can and will walk all over you. It is a fact of life. I know this as someone who has been used, who has been taken advantage of, and has had people walk all over me in my life. I'm telling you, if you don't set boundaries, it's gonna happen. So Boo Ray shouldn't feel like he's being used. It's his fault. He set the parameters. If you don't want to be used, then you tell Chris, hey, I'll move in here. I'll help a little bit till you get on your feet. But eventually, I expect you to get a job. And if you can't get booked for a lot of wrestling gigs, then you need to go get a shoot job and wrestle on the side. Because I'm not going to pay all these bills. You need to make that decision. You need to set those parameters. If you don't, then you deserve whatever you get. Simple as that. While living with Boo Ray, Chris meets a young woman named Linda. Chris is in love with her, and she was mature and stable. On the night of April 22nd, 2000, after dating for just a few weeks, Chris brings Linda back to Boo Ray's house to keep the party going into the early morning. Boo Ray decides to go to bed and give them privacy. Chris tells them they split a little bit of GHB. This upset Boo Ray because he didn't want that stuff in the house. He was fine with the alcohol and anything else, but not GHB. Chris was slumped in a chair and Linda was laying on the floor. He calls Tom because he's afraid to call 911 because it would piss him off. Chris said, I don't give a fuck. Call 911. They're not breathing. And that right there is a moment where I can feel Boo Ray's pain a little bit. Where you're in a situation where you may need to call 911, you may need to get involved in the situation, but you don't want to illustrate it because you don't want to piss off the wrestler that's staying with you or you're working with, or you don't want to feel like you're stabbing them in the back, even though maybe you should say something. So I get why Boo Ray was nervous about calling 911. But also, Boo Ray is also in an awkward situation because he made it clear, I don't want GHB in the house. So at that moment, I wouldn't have blamed Boo Ray if he kicked Chris out. If he's telling him, hey, you can do whatever you want. You want to drink? Fine. You want to smoke a little weed? Go ahead. You want to do some drugs? I'm cool. Just no GHB. That's the only thing I don't want you to do. So if there's one thing a person tells you not to do, and you feel like doing it anyway, fuck you, deserve to get kicked out. Especially if the person's being lenient with you and just saying, look, I don't want you to do this one thing. If you don't have enough self-control to not do that one thing, then you don't deserve to be helped. Again, simple as that. Boo Ray wakes up in the middle of the night to find Chris Adams and Chris's girlfriend Linda unresponsive, passed out on GHB. The paramedics get there while Tom and his wife stay on the phone with Boo Ray. They try to revive them and all of a sudden they say flatline. Chris survived, but Linda died. Chris was charged with manslaughter and he definitely blamed himself because he gave her too much accident. Now, he accidentally did this. He was not trying to kill Linda. He didn't hate Linda, but he was the one that gave her the GHB, so he blamed himself. He definitely had remorse for what he did because he starts drinking heavily and contemplates suicide because he was heartbroken over losing Linda. So obviously this is another tough time for Chris. Because again, he's trying to get his shit together, but he's going back to the bottle because of tragedy. Because unfortunately, when you're an addict, that's what tends to happen when you have a tragic moment enter your life. You usually go back to the drug or the alcohol because the pain is too strong for you to handle. And some people are able to handle the pain. Others just aren't. And it's sad. October 7th, Boo Ray's at his mother's house, where Chris calls him to vent, and Boo Ray invites him over. They start drinking, and Chris starts getting belligerent. Boo Ray tells him to keep it down because his mother's trying to sleep. Chris snaps, rips the post off the bed, and starts swinging at Boo Ray. Boo Ray grabs the post and cracks his index finger in the process. Chris locks him in a sleeper hold, and they start moving across the room. Chris pushes him onto the bed and starts gouging his eyes out, and bit his face several times and then his neck. He pins him down and starts choking him. His eyes got bright red again. Boo Ray grabs the gun from his nightstand and puts to Chris's shoulder and pulls the trigger. Once he pulled the trigger, Chris jumped a little bit, and it was enough for the bullet to hit his heart. Boo Ray just wanted to hurt him, not kill him. He calls 911 and tells him to get to the house quick. Sadly, they didn't get there fast enough, and Chris died. Okay, this right here is an awkward situation, obviously, because for Chris to get upset over that is fucking stupid. Obviously, he's telling him, hey, my mom's trying to sleep, keep it down. That's what you would say to anybody in a house. Hey, someone's sleeping, keep it down. You know, I've been in situations like that where I've had to tell people, hey, my parents are sleeping, keep it down, or my parents working in the other room, we gotta be quiet, you know. And that's whether I had a girl over that I was hooking up with or a guy friend that I'm just hanging out with. I'm like, look, we can't be too loud. Let's be careful. That's what I love about the studio. We can be loud up here and it doesn't bother anybody downstairs, especially back in the day when my father used to work from home. But yeah, so obviously, you know, the dude had to defend himself. And again, he said he didn't want to kill him. He just wanted to hurt him. And the reason I believe Boo Ray's story is because he called 911. If you're trying to murder somebody, if your goal is to kill another person, you're not calling 911. You're going to dispose of the body or leave the scene and just leave the body there to rot. That's what you do when you intend to kill somebody. That's why whenever something bad happens, like, you know, shooting somebody or there's a car accident, or God forbid you hit somebody with your car, if you stop the car and call 911, it's ruled as an accident. If you hit somebody and keep driving, it's a hit and run. It's manslaughter. It's at least ruled an accident if you call 911 and try to save the person's life. Now, some people could still press charges. Some people could still sue you. But the fact that you stopped to call 911 can help your case. At the very least, you get a reduced sentence or some shit like that. His funeral was packed with ex-wrestlers. Bet Earthquake's jealous about that. Family from the UK and many wrestling fans. So a lot of people came out to Chris Adams' funeral. Boo Ray was found not guilty because he was able to prove it was in fact self-defense. If Boo Ray hadn't shot him, he would have died. So it's ruled as self-defense because it was a him or me situation. So it's like, I don't want to kill Chris Adams, but if I don't kill him, he's going to kill me because he's choking me to death. He's biting my face. He's biting my neck. There's going to be blood all over the place. I'm going to die unless I do something. And like you said, he aimed for the shoulder, but when he jumped up, it hit his heart. Because when he shot the bullet, it caused him to jump up, and the bullet ended up hitting him in the heart. And that's what killed him. And also, Boo Ray has no joy in killing Chris. So Boo Ray's not happy with the fact that Chris Adams is dead. He's not excited about this. He's saddened because he didn't want to do that. Boo Ray obviously liked Chris on some level. He was a fan. They were friends. They hung out together. Boo Ray obviously had his best interest at heart. But when Chris was going to kill him, he did what he had to do. And Chris's brother is the only one who doesn't believe it was self-defense. So his brother obviously holds ill will towards Boo Ray, but the evidence that we're seeing clearly shows it was self-defense. So people can debate all day long whether or not Boo Ray's telling the truth. All we got is the evidence that's put in front of us, so that's all we have to go by. So based on what the court found, what the police found, and the ruling, it was self-defense. And I wasn't there. I don't think any of us were there. I don't think anybody watching this video was there. So we got to go with self-defense. Chris was well respected in the ring, but not outside of it. And when he realized he had a drinking problem, he did nothing to solve it. His ugly side outnumbered the good side. He was a loving father, despite not being a perfect husband or boyfriend. So yeah, so that's the one good quality Chris Adams had, was that he was a loving father. He never caused harm to his kids. But he was a shitty husband, he was a shitty boyfriend, and he was a great wrestler, but a terrible human being. Because he knew he had a drinking problem, but he did nothing to solve it. And I'm sorry, if you know you have a problem and you're not doing anything to fix it, it's hard to feel sorry for you. There are some people who are alcoholics, but they don't think they have a problem. They don't know that they have a problem. They think everything's fine. It's other people who have to tell them, hey, you have a drinking problem. You have a drug problem. You have an addiction. So we hear otherwise. And then once you hit bottom and you realize you have a problem, then you can take the steps to fix it, as a lot of people have. Buff Bagwell being an example. Jake the Snake being another example. Both of them realized they had problems. Both of them turned their lives around. And today they are now well-respected and productive members of society, and not just the wrestling business, but society as a whole. So yeah, it's hard to feel sorry for Chris Adams. It really is. Again, great wrestler, great father, but sucked at everything else. And sadly, that's going to be his legacy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will wrap up this episode of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring. I thank you guys so much for tuning in. Tune in next week. We're going to have a great show for you guys. We're going to be diving into the career of one of the greatest women's wrestlers and valets of all time, the life and career of the one and only sensational Sherri. That's coming up next week here on the Boochcast. So make sure you guys follow us on all of our podcast platforms. The link is down in the description box below. Make sure you follow us on all our social media platforms. The link is down in the description box below. You can support the Boochcast by going to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/the Boochcast/support. That link is down in the description box below. And of course, as always, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified so you never miss another episode of Boochcast Reviews Darkside of the Ring, as well as other additional Boochcast YouTube content. We'll talk to you guys next time. Until then, pizza, baby!